Gordon Branshaw's death, and they asked me to speak out about the risks of swimming with orca, because that's what I do as a researcher in the wild. And I said to them, no, I can't do that. But I am very, because there are no risks. It doesn't happen in the wild. There are no deaths, there's no verified records of attacks. Although SeaWorld, of course, will say that things like whales coming up and very close to people and knocking them over with waves is an attack. Yeah, so anyway, I said no. But I said I would be happy to write an affidavit and appear as an expert witness to talk about the risks of swimming with orca in captivity. And I did prepare an affidavit for that, and it actually wasn't needed. So it's part of the record out there, but that was kind of a turning point for me, because I had to move from being strictly a scientist who dealt with wild animals to speaking out publicly in a government forum. And then shortly afterwards, Morgan appeared on the scene. And so I thought I'd tell you a little bit about her story. Some of you will know it, and I apologise. And those of you that don't, at least you'll get a little bit of a primer on what went on. So sometime around 2006, 2007, Morgan was born off Norway. Now we don't know exactly where and we don't know exactly when, but this is the time that we can work out based on the length of what size she was, her length, when she was captured. Now, in June 2010, she turned up emaciated and alone off the coast of the Netherlands. Now, she was free swimming, and much of the media at the time, and to this day, even 2 weeks ago, I had a meeting with the Vice President of Zoological Operations at SeaWorld in San Antonio, and he also believed, because of what was put out in the media by the Dolphinarium Harderwijk, that she was stranded. Now, she was never stranded. Let's get that 100% clear here. She never was stranded. She was captured. All right? She did need rescuing, absolutely, but she was never stranded. And this is important legally in the laws in the EU. Okay, so here we have the trophy photo. You guys have seen them. Usually it's a dead animal. In this case, it's alive. But this is Dolphinarium Harderwijk. This photograph was taken by the skipper of the boat, who approached me, and I have had interviews with him, and we have photos and video of the event that were not released by the aquarium, because you will remember the aquarium told everybody that she had stranded. Now, the permit that they got to capture her had a caveat on it that was very important, and that was that she could not be used for primarily commercial purposes, and that included public display. A couple of weeks after she was captured, she was on public display. Hundreds of thousands of people saw Morgan in this tank. The lines were up to 4 hours long, and you got 15 minutes to watch her. It was, we believe, from some leaked information from the Dolphinarium Harderwijk, one of their staff members told us that it was the first time in 10 years that the aquarium had made money. Now, this was their full education program. Yeah, you might laugh, but actually this is it. And it's very, very sad, because when I started making critical comments about that, suddenly this little flyer appeared that they handed out to everybody in the line. And 90% of those flyers got chucked into the rubbish bin. And I've got photographs of the piles of them in the rubbish bin next to the tank. And what I find so frustrating, and it's, I guess, where the laughter comes from, because it's so sad, because the law states that you must have education when you have these animals on display, and the law, that's it, that's all they have to have. This is their education. It's just disgusting. And also the other caveat was, and this is where our court case was based on, the requirement to release her. Now, there's a number of different laws under which this came, but primarily it was the EU Habitats Directive. And the capture permit actually states that she must be released. And so do some of the other laws and regulations in the EU. But of course, we know that she wasn't released. She was kept in this tank for 18 months. It was barely 2 body lengths wide and 6 body lengths long for 18 months. And she was growing, they were feeding her well, and she did recover remarkably well. They did a reasonably good job of the rescue and the rehabilitation to a point. Now this is the same tank, 18 months. Now they told us that there was nothing wrong with this. And if I go back to this photograph, you can see that she's pushed up against a gate. I hired a helicopter because I'd been banned from the aquarium, and I took this photograph and some other video and photographs. And that little slide out area there is actually not a slide out, that is an entranceway into a larger tank that she was denied access to. There were dolphins in there that she could have had access to. In court, the vet perjured himself and stated that they would put her with the dolphins. But that very same vet, Niels van Elk, and I do hope you get to see this on YouTube somewhere, Niels. Niels van Elk perjured himself in court and stated that he would put her with the dolphins and would give her access to the larger tanks. Now, this very same vet had published a paper on how those very same dolphins on the other side of the gate had genital herpes. So he knew that they were not going to let Morgan get into the tank with the genital herpes, because genital herpes in animals has been shown to cause abortions and also neurological issues. So of course they did not want the genital herpes to be getting into the whole orca population, because they knew that they were going to ship this animal into a facility that was going to, and she was going to be used for breeding. So Morgan kept growing, and we did a number of court cases. 2 of them were concurrent, and one of them was on her capture permit, and one of them was on the welfare and the whole release aspect. Unfortunately, we lost both of them, but we haven't lost everything yet. We still have things going on in the background, and a lot of people have been contacting us on Facebook over the last 5 years and asking us what we're currently doing. And we keep telling them, before all this came out about the spies with coming to Superpod and all these other places, that we could not reveal on Facebook because we knew that the industry was watching us. And I can't reveal here, but we hope to have something out in the next couple of weeks, which is not legal at this stage in terms of, it's not a court case, but it's a legally based document prepared by lawyers, which is really going to make people sit up and look at the processes which has happened, including things like, you know, what is the definition of education? What is the definition of scientific research? And what the hell is going on with the CITES permits and exporting these animals from country to country? So we'll be posting that on the website, and I'm sure guys like Jeff Ventry, who are the Twitter gurus, will be twittering about this stuff, so you'll be able to get information. So I suggest you follow Jeff if you aren't already on Twitter. Now, because this tank was so impoverished, we started to see these stereotypic behaviors. Now, for those of you that don't know stereotypic behaviors, that's an abnormal, repetitive behavior that has no obvious outward function. If you like, it's a coping mechanism. And you see it typically in animals in zoos where you see pacing. You'll see it also in domestic animals like horses who bite the top of the stall if they're kept in the stalls too long. You see it in parrots in cages where they pluck their feathers. This one is taken about 3 seconds apart of Morgan, and you can see this distended throat area. I call it gulping, and it was accompanied by a very gluttural sound, sort of like a and she would sit there and do this for quite a long time. It's not necessarily physically damaging, but we don't know, because she could also be damaging herself internally, but she did a lot of other things that were self-mutilating. So they used this as one of the reasons to ship her to Loro Parque in Spain. They said that she was institutionalized, and that was a word, that exact word is on her permit. It says she does not have to be released if she has institutionalized behaviors. So they encouraged them, they taught her all sorts of stereotypic behaviors so that they could then point to them and say she can't be released. Now they also said that she needed to be socialized. But their form of socialization and what we would consider socialization in the real world were 2 different things. And although you see her in a show here at the beginning, that wasn't how it was for Morgan. And to this day, she still spends approximately 75% of her time locked in the medical tank, which is not much bigger than this stage. It's smaller than the tank that she was in Dolphinarium Harderwijk. This is Morgan at the back, and one of the females attacking her. I documented this through a gate, over a bridge, past a fence, and then behind the scenes with a long lens. And Loro Parke got to the point where they ended up putting a whole lot of boards across the gates so that nobody can see any of the animals except for during the shows. When I arrive on location, I'm typically then followed about by police. And the last time I went, I was escorted out by armed military police. And of course, this is part of the industry that tells us that they've got nothing to hide. Now, one of the things that I was doing was photographing the rake marks on Morgan. The different colours are indicative of the different visits that I went. So I would stay in sometimes for 2 to 3 weeks and then visit about every third day, or I'd go 2 days in a row and then not go for 5 days, trying to not give them a pattern so that they would have the police there all the time and the police would get sick and tired of it. At one stage, the head of police escorted me out of the park because I said I did not have my identification with me, and he said I'd have to go to the hotel, and I said no problem at all, but I don't have a car, and I said you'll have to take me, and he's quite surprised by this because I willingly want to go with the police. And so we go to the police car and he opens the back door, and I turned to him and I said, I'm sorry sir, but I'm not a criminal, I'm going to ride in the front with you. Because the last thing I wanted was Loro Parke getting a photo of me sitting in the back of the police car. So off we go. I made a joke, could we put the siren on, but he wouldn't. And then, so we get to the hotel and I said to him, I just have to look for my passport, but while I'm looking for my passport, perhaps you would like to look at some photographs of Morgan. And I showed him what was going on, and he was horrified. And he said to me, if you want to go back to the park, we have no problem with it. And that was why the next time I went, the armed military police turned up because the police didn't come to kick me out. So it's escalating. But one of the things that I was very concerned about was to document this stuff scientifically, because it's not just a matter of going in and snapping photos willy-nilly. This stuff needs to be stuff that we can use in court as evidence. So what we did was every single rake mark that you see on this body map back here is documented with a photograph. And this is an example of the red ones, and you can see all the little squares. So we made these body maps, and then every frame has a 2 number on front of it and then a multiple number after it. The 2 number is the date of that particular month, and then the following numbers are the frame number of the picture. So we could then, if anybody, the judge, or anybody says, well, what about these rakes? We want to see a photo of them. We can instantly go to that photo and pull it up and show the judge. And we did have some photographs that we were not sure if they were rake marks or not, then we didn't use them. Now Morgan, during all of this, was getting very, very upset, as you might imagine. She's a young animal at this stage, probably around 4 to 5 years of age, and she's being brutally attacked. Every day I saw Morgan being slammed, rammed so hard she was lifted out of the water. And a lot of unwanted sexual attention as well from the males. So she started chewing on the concrete, and I was documenting her doing this about every 72 seconds. And at the top photograph of my visit in June 2012, you can see her teeth look nearly pristine. 4 months later, you can see the edges are very sharp. And if we zoom in on this, I know it's out of focus, I'm sorry, but this was taken from about 800 metres or 800 yards away. You can see blue paint. And the blue paint, if we go back 2 photographs, you'll see this is brown paint. So the blue paint is from the bottom. So this is just the surface behaviour that I could see. Underneath, under the water, she's chewing the edges as well with the blue. And then this is a close-up that was taken by a trainer that was leaked to me by a colleague of theirs. And in here, you can see blue paint again. Just up here, there's some scratches with blue paint. There's some edges have got blue paint on them as well. And then this little black dot here, which is the start of the root being exposed. So we haven't got any close-up photographs of her teeth at the moment, but we believe that they've started drilling them. And you can also see that her gums are sunken, and this black colouring on the gums is not normal. This is gingivitis, and it's really bad. It can lead to all sorts of issues in the gums. And this was November 2013. So now we're starting to see physical damage to the rest of her body as well. This dark colouring on the skin is from self-mutilation. It's termed hypertrophic tissue damage. It's from repeatedly banging your skin or your body against something. And the raw open wound is because the skin becomes so soft that at some point or another it's just going to rip off, even if she's not rubbing it against something hard. Now, Loro Parke insists to this day that there's nothing wrong with Morgan and everything is normal. So I'm quite disappointed at what their standard of normal is. I suspect anything less than this and she'd be dead, but they'd probably still say she's okay. They're living in a completely different world, these guys. And then the SeaWorld male Keto. For those of you who've seen the documentary Blackfish, you would recall that Alexis Martinez was tragically killed by an adult male orca shortly before Dawn Brandshaw was killed. And this was the male that did it. So these guys, it's a SeaWorld orca held at Loro Parke. All of the orca in Loro Parke are owned by SeaWorld apparently, including Morgan now. And this is part of what our white paper is that we're preparing. And they use him to try and mate with her as often as possible. We've been told that there's every likelihood that they're using hormones to induce ovulation so that they can get her bred as soon as possible. And any of the progeny, and you can see some of the rape marks here on her tummy, any of the progeny, we believe, according to another leaked document, will belong to SeaWorld. And at that point, this becomes true whale laundering because those offspring can then be shipped anywhere in the world. Currently, Morgan cannot be shipped outside the EU. She can be shipped from aquarium to aquarium within the EU, but not outside of the European Union. But those calves can go anywhere. So that was kind of my story with Morgan, and we haven't given up on her, and I always tell people we have two solutions for Morgan. One is that better for her, but she dies, and that's a horrible thing to say, but if she dies, she's certainly in a better position than she is in this situation. And the best solution is that we get her out, and we're not going to stop until there's one of those two solutions. And I just hope that we're not 20 years down the track, and I take my hat off to Howie and Ken and Jared and all those guys that have been fighting for Lolita for so many years. And I hope in 20 years' time I'm not sitting here at Superpod 2014, or no, well, we'll be at 24 then, won't we? And saying, telling you guys where we're at with Morgan, except to tell you that we've actually done something really cool, and I have a solution at the end of this. So basically what's happened with Morgan is that they've been using her for greenwashing and for laundering. And the greenwashing in my mind is that they say that they're doing these rescues, but they're not true rescues. In my mind, this is a misuse of the word. It's disgusting use of the word. A rescue is actually a rescue, and this is far from that. So I started thinking, if this is happening with Morgan, what the hell is going on out there that we don't really know much about? And as I was at some of these aquariums gathering evidence for different things that I was working on, again, I can't reveal too much, but all the SeaWorld spies out there, you should start recording about now. That clapping was for you guys. So I started photographing things, and I hadn't really taken that much notice of them, but I was now starting to realise that there were more and more animals out there. There were dolphins that had been quote unquote rescued. There were pilot whales that had been rescued. And how many of them were there? And what happened? But of course Blackfish came out. Now I should just put a little caveat in here that Morgan's story was actually filmed for Blackfish. Gabriella Kalpawaith came to Lorapake, and she, obviously you guys see the interviews with Alexis Martinez's fiance. All of that stuff was filmed there at Lorapake and on Tenerife, but we were also filming for Morgan. We filmed me being removed out of the Dolphinarium Harderwijk. It was all undercover filming, but we got it on film. We did interviews with me, we filmed a whole lot of stuff about Morgan, but Morgan's story became so complex, and Tillicum's story became so complex that it was too much to tell. So it became Tillicum's story with a little bit of a hint about what was going on at Lorapake. So we are hoping eventually to do a story about Morgan. We have some phenomenal footage, and we have sex and murder and mystery and all the espionage, and we're just kind of hoping for the happy ending. So that's where we're going on this. But when Blackfish came out, SeaWorld started to realise, of course, because of the help of folks like yourself, that they really had to buck up their public image. And so they started pushing more about how wonderful they are with these rescues. And they said that there were 25,000 plus animals that they'd rescued. And together with Heather Murphy, Naomi Rose, and a couple of others, we started really questioning what the hell was going on with that. And Heather, Naomi, and I crafted some emails to send to SeaWorld to ask some questions. And at this time, this breakdown wasn't available. We just had SeaWorld saying that they had the 25,000 animals that they were rescued, and that was it. So this was back in December 2014. So we sent an email to Dr. Chris Dold. Now, I had met Dr. Chris Dold at a meeting that was organised by Sir Richard Branson, who is the owner of Virgin Airlines. And it's another long and involved story, but basically myself, Naomi, and a bunch of others were sitting at the table with a bunch of captivity people. And Chris was one of them. And Chris turns to everybody in the room and says, if you have any questions about SeaWorld and the way we operate, please email me. And we went, excellent. So, a year and a half later, I sent him an email on the 20th of December. Not good timing, obviously, but that was my window of opportunity, so I sent the email off. And I asked him some very basic questions. Of those 474 cetaceans, no, actually, beg your pardon, of those 250,000 animals, how many of them were cetaceans? And we didn't get an answer, but miraculously we got that little thing that you saw, that little graphic appeared a few months later on the SeaWorld website. So we sent another email to him and we said, coincidentally, you've got a bit of a breakdown on your website now, so we'd like a further breakdown, and we'd like to know, of those 474 cetaceans, how many survived? Then we asked him, what species did you rescue? And then we said to him, of those that were rescued, where are they now? So how many have remained at SeaWorld, and how many have you traded to someone else? No answer. So we sent him another email saying, just following up on the email. No answer. So at my meeting with the Vice President of Zoological Operations at SeaWorld a few weeks ago, he said, do you have any further questions after the end of our meeting? I said, yes, I'd like to know why your head of veterinary sciences, Dr. Chris Dold, doesn't answer my emails. And he said, oh, I can't imagine why he wouldn't. You could just try sending it again. And I said, well, I might just do that, but I'd prefer that you follow up on it, please. So the next day I see him, and he says, Chris says, please send the email again. So clearly he'd told Chris that he had to answer it. So I did. Chris answered it with a typical piece of fluff of SeaWorld fluff that had no answer to it, and told us to go to the government website. So I have since replied to Dr. Dold, and I have said to him that the government doesn't have the information that we're seeking, but clearly SeaWorld does. And if they would like to send me their database, I'll process it for them and give them the answers back. So we're awaiting an answer, and we didn't get one today. Now, we sent that a week ago, so we may have the answer tomorrow, and if I do, I'll let you know what's in the database. All right, so carrying on with this, remember 474 cetaceans, it's quite a lot. So where are they all, huh? Now the thing we were also interested in, don't worry about all the black stuff, just focus on the red. These are grants that SeaWorld has got that are public money to do these rescues. So when SeaWorld says that it's doing all these wonderful rescues, well done them, but it's funded through your taxpayers' money. Okay, keep that in mind, because in my mind, a quote-unquote rescue does not equal a rescue when it's being used to collect cetaceans to stock commercial facilities. It's not a rescue. Okay, so how many individuals are involved now? Well, we truly don't know, because so many of these facilities are doing this and we do not have access to their data. There's no government records on what's happening to these captured cetaceans. And it's happening globally. But what we have been able to do is do some very basic online research and actually look at newspaper articles and websites on some of the facilities. Well, they're public accessible websites, and when they're running around beating their chest, telling everybody how wonderful they are. So we do know so far that we've got 13 different species that have been rescued. This is not individuals, this is different species. And there is a theme, it seems, on the different aquariums that are doing this. Now, you'll probably not be surprised to see Dolphinarium Heart of Oak involved here. Now, Vancouver Aquarium runs around with their hands in their ears shouting how wonderful they are at conservation. They are the third worst culprit that I've been able to find so far. This is just some of the individuals. But if we get the next one, don't die on me. There we go. Okay, now you'll start to see a little bit more of a theme, see? Now, those of you that have the zoom in camera, zoom in on the one that starts with S there. So, I think we really need to take these guys to task on what's happening here. Because it's all very well to run around and say that you're doing this wonderful stuff, but it really isn't always that wonderful. And yes, some individuals, like the grey whale JJ, were released back out into the wild. But we need to do this responsibly, and we need to do it with follow-up, and we need to do proper rehab and rehabilitation. So what I was proposing, and this is what's going to be in my presentation at the conference next week, is some of the stuff that we can do from here. Because I don't believe that we should be doing this with rescued cetaceans. I think that we should be doing something that's a little bit more, let's just say 2015 and forward. I'm proposing that we look at the triple R's, that we look at rescue, rehabilitation and release. And if you can imagine an island like this, or that this was part of a peninsula, and we actually do something constructive with that proposed $50 million that SeaWorld is saying that they want to use to expand tanks. And imagine if we had something like this. Now, the idea with this is that we can expand and contract as we need it. If we have multiple animals, we can extend to the next bay. So this would be probably the first one that we would build, but when we could afford it or when we needed it, we could do this one. This is a gate that could be opened. We can have a gate in here and go through to this one. And these, in this pen, might be animals that could never be released. Perhaps they have some physical problem or some mental issue. Perhaps they really have been institutionalized. But for those that can be released, we could keep them in these back areas and then take them out for swims to meet their colleagues, to teach them how to swim back out in the ocean and catch food. This area here would be a husbandry pen, and in some cases we could possibly even look at making it so that we could run non-profit organisations that are funded through the public visiting. So it's not a matter of shows, but it's a matter of doing education. Now, I've always believed that we shouldn't have them on public display because it is only encouraging the commercial interests of places like SeaWorld. But if we can have them on public display for non-profit organisations who truly have the mission to return these animals to the wild, then I think that that's okay. And if we zoom in a little bit on what I'm calling at the moment the landing bay, so let me go back here, in here, for instance, we proposed that we would do as small an ecological footprint as possible. So our observation centres would be run on solar. These long, tall things here are bladeless wind turbines. We'd use natural insulation so that we keep down the costs of running these things, so we don't have to build another dam for electricity. So, we could bring down a dam instead of put one up. And that we would have small self-contained units around the island for the trainers, because obviously we're still going to need people to train the animals for husbandry. We're going to need veterinarians on site. We're going to need divers to maintain the nets, security guys. So it's going to be a big mission. But again, this is expandable and contractable as funding and facilities allow us to do it. One of the things, of course, that SeaWorld and places like that always say, well, you can't get up close to the animals, you can't view them underwater. Well, we could put a little underwater tunnel in there, right? I'd walk through there. I think that'd be kind of cool. Now, this is all to scale. We did take a real island and put everything into scale so that we knew how it would look in the real world if we built something like this. And this husbandry pen across the back here, this is actually 100 metres or approximately 100 yards across and 100 yards this way. And the largest tank currently at the moment is, I believe, about half that. This is it from the air. And then we would have a medical pen inside. The orca are to scale. So this medical pen is actually bigger than some of the main tanks for the current orca. And we've got weighing scales and stuff like this in here. And just, some little bits of an idea of how this could work and what it could look like. So I think that we need to reconsider how we're going to help these animals. And once we get them out of these facilities, we really do need to have a number of options available. And there's proposed workshops that are happening and actual workshops that are happening in the next weeks to months. And a lot of this stuff is going to be moving forward. We're consulting with veterinarians, with trainers, with zoo designers.